Well,
relation?
twice I tried to speak of my disappointment with regard to the European Academy. So I certainly share your analysis of what's happening. At the same time, I rather suspect that Europe is in a transitional phase in that respect, and that in order to remain competitive in its own understanding of what competitiveness in the world economy, it has to start investing in its universities. And you see this in some conglomerations that are occurring in some sites. But I mean, if you travel to Asia, I'm told by people, you know, I'm an administrator in a university, and people who are going to study at universities in Singapore or in Hong Kong or in China or you know, in a host of developing countries, they're saying they are so far ahead of what we have in Europe that soon this will become a social and political crisis, that Europe cannot afford to continue on this path of an impoverishment and an evisceration of its universities. So and I see in terms of the developments, efforts to adopt American models with sort of privatization and different forms of funding for university structures, that this is part of the transition. Now, what that's going to, I'm not sure. I don't mean to be optimistic, in terms of philosophy in this respect. I'm not sure what to think about the European Academy, but I don't believe it can continue along this line. I think it would be catastrophic. And, yeah.
When you were speaking, you said that you were frustrated, that you feel like you were talking to yourself often when you're in North American universities, and that's why you felt you had to leave. However, as an educator, don't you think maybe it might be like a responsibility that you have to bring what you're learning back to the States? And
well, that's what sort of took me back. I said, not only that, but I felt, because of my, some of my philosophical investments, I thought I should be doing this in English. This is the language in which I am most able to proceed. But in a situation where you watch the students draining away, where you have fewer and fewer sites of exchange, that sense of responsibility rapidly becomes abstract in itself. For me, I hate to be so autobiographical, but I've found that, it's useful. Coming to Saas-Fee, where there was quite a group of students who were really interested in this material, was actually a lifeline for me at certain moments, because I simply didn't have access to that many students. I could go and I could have, undergraduate classes in literature and so forth. I could introduce a certain amount of this material to students, and they would get quite excited, but it would simply disappear in that larger institutional structure. And so I'd have this momentary gratification, which I found very suspicious at certain moments, but a momentary gratification of a contact with students, and then I would never see them again, right, in this structure. So I didn't have the capacity to form students or to work with students over a period of time, or to be part of a community that involves students. And in that sense, as a teacher, I was becoming increasingly debilitated, I would say. So responsibility, I think my responsibility is to work with this kind of thinking as much as I can, and be involved with others as much as I can. So if I have to go outside my native land, so be it.
It's just, since you were saying, it seems like the greatest need for this is in these places that you just left, that I don't think it's easy at all, and probably can be rather thankless at times, but maybe that's where the effort is most needed to be concentrated.
Well, yeah. I would say that the nature of the need has been changing. Part of what I've been trying to think about is the way the socio-historical conditions have been changing over the last 2 or 3 decades. It's not clear to me that America needs post-Heideggerian thinking right now, except in a very mediated sense. Yeah.
Yeah, to sort of follow up on that, something I was going to ask before. You think maybe you need to just change your teaching, not yours personally, I guess, but like change a method of teaching in the States? I agree that there's a sense that America doesn't need some things that Europe needs when it comes to philosophy. But I think it does, it's just getting it in a different way. I do agree, and I'm hung up on this thing that Wolfgang said to us on one of the first days, that philosophy is done through comedy in America. But in that case, it's a kind of, I agree with that, because in America, like you said, if in Europe you have a sense of being in the world, I was thinking, well, the kind of equivalent of America is you don't have a sense of being in the world, you have a sense of living the dream. It's kind of this weird place where everyone is so good at marketing that they're very good at talking to you on the level of, you know, wants and needs and desires. And in Europe, it's funny for Americans because you get the sense oftentimes that you're being marketed poorly to, you know, there's certain things that are funny. But out in America, outside of that relationship that defines so much of American politics and thoughts about between how Americans think of other Americans, and again, as Avital said, you know, Americans living anywhere, I don't know where the borders of this country are. That you have people who step outside that relationship, and oftentimes it's comedians who trace the relationships from the outside and help people think, but the thought dissolves into laughter so quickly that it's no longer philosophy, even if it seems like it is. So, and this is also why I think that Zizek, people like Zizek who write like Zizek are a good gateway drug for Americans to European styles of thinking, because they manage to not let it just be thought, not let it just be philosophy, and not let it just be laughter. They find a way to capture the short circuit. So my question is, in order, do you think maybe you just need to hammer out a completely new and possibly maybe not thankless, but uncomfortable new method of teaching philosophy to Americans?
Become
wherever
Bill
we are?
Hicks.
I need a new routine, in other words.
Yeah.
Better
You know,
outside of Saas-Fee, not here, please. Outside.
We're your focus group, we're helping you.
yeah. I mean, I'm an old dog, you know, and the new tricks that you're talking about are. If the questions that if the larger movements that Granell is talking about have any, if there's any purchase to this analysis, then I would be skeptical about the worthiness of trying to dress up what I have to say in a more passable form in order to try to get people to come around to the way I'm thinking. I think what I'm trying, the reason I'm willing to entertain this analysis, which strikes me as, you know, extremely problematic in many respects, but he's talking about the forces that Heidegger was trying to diagnose when he talked about the end of philosophy. Right? He's talking about nihilism in various forms. He's talking about the way in which advanced capitalism literally destroys the need for philosophy. One can't, in that situation, hope to, seduce one's interlocutors into a more, how could I say, a more reasonable stance. It is, I think, in a certain sense, I think one has to take seriously the gravity of what Granell is describing here. And part of, you know, what I'm trying to say, I mean, I'm willing to talk about autobiographical experience because I think I'm, you know, just from my experience, I think that my experience is touching upon something, that there is something like a destruction of the conditions of serious philosophy along these lines in the context in which I've been working. And if one goes into that mode of attempting a more, to pass in some way, to pass the thought and to engage in a way that engages that interest, well, one is perhaps caught in a marketing of one's thought that is perhaps a destruction of the thought itself.